The letter arrived on Tuesday morning, dusty from a 1,000-mile voyage and sealed with shattered wax from the frontier. Clara Whitmore clutched it in her shaky hands, never expecting that those few lines of meticulous script would lead her to a deception so profound that it would shake her beliefs about trust, family, and the courage to protect the innocent. What she found when she got off that train in Cedar Falls tested her to the core and made her become someone she never believed possible. To protect 7 forgotten souls, a woman will fight heaven and earth. Before we resume, tell us where you're listening, and if this tale impacts you, subscribe because I have something special for you tomorrow. The autumn of 1883 found Clara Whitmore folding linens in the tiny accommodations above Murphy's General Store in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Her 26 years felt like 60 as she pressed wrinkles from sheets that would grace beds in homes she would never own. The industrial town hummed with textile mills and cold smoke. But Clara's world had shrunk to her tiny room, the schoolhouse where she taught restless children, and Sunday services where she sat alone in the third pew, watching families enter with their laughing children. 3 years ago, Clara resigned herself to spinsterhood after Thomas Henderson picked the banker's daughter over the schoolteacher with her small finances and simple brown gowns. The sting had subsided, but loneliness had taken root in her bones like winter cold. She had her students, her modest library, and the townspeople's appreciation for her education efforts. After the mill whistle stopped and the last lamp was extinguished in the neighboring windows, Clara would lie awake wondering if this calm life was all God had planned for her. The letter was yellowed and forgotten between the pages of Mrs. Murphy's evening tea newspaper until Clara's restless fingers found it while searching for something to think about. Clara's breath caught in her throat when she saw an ad in the Western Tribune seeking a good-hearted woman to join me in Wyoming. A 32-year widower with significant land near Cedar Falls, I seek companionship and participation in constructing a meaningful life. I have been given children who need a mother, and I offer a comfortable home, respect, and a bright future. Correspondence, welcome. Write to Benjamin Parker, Cedar Falls, Wyoming Territory. Clara read the sentences 3 times before placing the paper aside, her heart racing with an unexpected rhythm that seemed hopeful. She heard rumors of mail-order weddings, which were either scandalous or practical depending on who said them. The gossip said respectable ladies didn't answer such ads, but Clara never felt respectable. Born to a bankrupt merchant and a mother who died too young, she was raised by an aunt who did her duty but never appeared to love it. Clara lighted her small oil lamp and took out her best writing paper, which she reserved for letters to distant cousins who rarely responded. After staring at the blank page for over an hour, she began writing, her careful calligraphy flowing like water. Dear Mr. Parker, I saw your Western Tribune ad when I was wondering if happiness was the best a woman like me could hope for. Clara Whitmore, 26, is a Millbrook, Pennsylvania teacher. I have no family or beauty, but I have a calm temperament, a passion of learning, and a hopefully kind heart. Your Wyoming life and children intrigue me. If you would want to connect with a woman who dreams of horizons outside her window, I would be glad to learn more about your situation and possibly share mine. I respect Clara Whitmore. She sealed the letter before she changed her mind and posted it the next morning, thinking such a silly gesture would likely have no effect. 3 weeks later, Clara shivered as she broke the seal on another letter with the same precise handwriting and Cedar Falls postmark. Miss Whitmore, your letter made my home happier than you can imagine. I received several responses to my ad, but yours was sincere and moved me deeply. You talk down contentment, but true contentment is rarer than gold and more valuable than any treasure this territory may give. 2 years ago, fever killed my beautiful wife, Margaret, leaving me a widower. The children you ask about are my greatest blessing and responsibility. Their ages range from 15 to 3, and they have offered me great delight and difficulty. The older ones help with ranch labor, while the younger ones need continual care. I won't say life is easy here. Extreme winters, miles from neighbors, and continuous work. But this terrain calls to the soul and helps a guy believe he can develop something enduring. I would love to continue our correspondence if you are sincerely interested in Wyoming life, if he had the appropriate spouse. Please share your dreams, anxieties, and what made you the lady who would answer a stranger's letter so honestly. With rising esteem, Benjamin Parker. Each time Clara read that letter, she could recite parts from memory and discover fresh meaning in Benjamin's precise words. He wrote of children without specifying how many, obstacles without specifying their nature, and frontier life that appeared both intimidating and enticing to a woman who had spent her entire life in civilized civilization. Throughout the winter, their letters crossed the continent like bridges of words and hope. Benjamin talked about late evenings maintaining fences and early mornings breaking ice on water troughs, how snow made the countryside enchanting, and the delight of seeing cattle grow fat on summer grass. Clara wrote on her students' growth, the books she read and the thoughts they sparked, and her developing feeling that Millbrook was too narrow for her. Clara became braver and more honest with each exchange. She told Benjamin about her parents' deaths, her aunt who had reared her with responsibility rather than love, her loneliness, and her dreams she had nearly forgotten she had. He told memories of his late wife Margaret, his sadness that nearly overtook him, and his drive to construct something significant from his loss. Clara decided in March, when the last winter snow was melting and the first crocuses appeared behind Murphy's store. Benjamin's latest letter included a formal marriage proposal, an invitation to Wyoming as his wife, and enough money for train fare and travel. He wrote honestly about her struggles, frontier life's isolation and difficulty, and his conviction that they could create something beautiful and lasting. Clara handed her notice at the school, endured her neighbors' startled murmurs and disapproving eyes, and spent her final weeks in Millbrook preparing for a voyage that would take her further from everything familiar than she had ever dreamed. She sold most of her stuff, keeping only her favorite books, her mother's wedding dress, and her few remaining jewels. She gave up or sold the rest to buy ranch-appropriate apparel and a strong travel trunk for Wyoming. Clara wrote one more note to Benjamin in her empty room the night before she left, informing him she was coming as a lady ready to face Cedar Falls' challenges. We spent a lot of time preparing and telling this story, so if you like it, subscribe to our channel. Returning to the tale. Her promises included becoming a wonderful wife and mother to his children, working alongside him to develop their life, and facing the future with courage and commitment. Your loyal Clara signed it and put it in her travel suitcase to offer him when they met. Clara discovered new vistas on the train west, which she had only read about in books and seen in newspapers. Pennsylvania's undulating hills gave way to the Great Plains' infinite flat expanse under huge sky that dwarfed anything below them. Other passengers talked about mining, cattle, and ranching fortunes in the wilds, but Clara focused more on the man at the end of the line. From his letters, she remembered Benjamin's tall, slender body, dark hair, blue eyes, honest work calluses, and friendly, unassuming face. She sent him an expensive photo shot at the local studio, but she feared that the stern-faced woman in the formal position bore little similarity to the person she felt herself becoming with each mile, further from her previous life. The train arrived in Cedar Falls on a beautiful May morning, the air crisp and clear, burning Clara's lungs with the unexpected joy of free breathing. The town was smaller than she thought, with a main street lined with wooden buildings and a few residences that seemed to huddle against the huge terrain. Mountains rose in the distance like ancient fortress walls, still snow-capped in May. Clara walked onto the platform with her pulse pounding against her ribs, searching the small audience for the man who would become her husband. She saw him right away, standing slightly apart with the confidence of a confident person. Benjamin Parker was tall and slim, with dark hair touched with premature gray at the temples and blue eyes that seemed to be anticipating and worried. He dressed neat pressed clothes and polished boots that showed great effort for this significant event. Clara felt something release and bloom inside her chest like a flower opening to sunshine as their eyes met across the platform. Benjamin approached slowly, removing his hat as he approached, and his voice was soothing like his letters. "Benjamin Parker, Miss Whitmore, Cedar Falls welcomes you." Clara smiled more honestly than in months. "Thank you, Mr. Parker, for including me. I hope I can earn your trust." Benjamin softened and offered her his arm politely. "Clara, I think we'll get along." "Yes, and please call me Clara, not Miss Whitmore. That person reminds me of myself." Benjamin easily loaded Clara's trunk onto a strong cart pulled by two waiting horses while she surveyed her new town. She found everything smaller and more transitory than imagined, buildings that appeared to have been built swiftly and could disappear immediately if the wind changed direction. There was something positive about the place, like individuals willing to settle despite the obstacles. Benjamin told her the ranch is 1 hour from town as he helped her onto the wagon seat. "I hope travel doesn't bother you. If you're ready, we could visit the church first." Reverend Morrison is waiting, and I have the license. Clara nodded, straightening her travel attire and testing her bonnet-pinned hair. Although she knew the wedding would happen quickly upon her arrival, the truth made her stomach flutter with excitement and anxiety. She would become Mrs. Benjamin Parker in hours, mistress of a ranch she had never seen, stepmother to children she had never met, and wife to a man she only knew from letters and this brief encounter. The short ceremony was held in a small wooden church that smelled like pine and beeswax. A nice man with sympathetic eyes, Reverend Morrison seemed to grasp that this was not the ordinary love union, but he spoke the sacred words. He would have showed any couple exchanging vows with the same solemnity. Benjamin spoke calmly, while Clara shivered slightly as she swore to love, honor, and cherish this guy she was just meeting. Clara felt a promise and obligation as Benjamin put the plain gold band on her finger. Clara Whitmore, Millbrook, Pennsylvania's spinster teacher, was gone. Mrs. Benjamin Parker didn't know what that meant or what obstacles were ahead, but she was ready to learn. The trip to the property took them through unspoiled grassland with wildflowers and pure cold mountain runoff streams. Benjamin pointed out sights and told the land's history, loving this untamed region in every word. Clara relaxed beside him, their discussion flowing as smoothly as in their letters, and she began to think this improbable marriage may work. Clara asked about the children as they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. I want to be ready for them. Benjamin seemed contemplative, and Clara couldn't read his expression. He said cautiously, they're good kids. Since their mother died, they've had to grow up rapidly and may be bashful with you. They want a mother, and I know they'll adore you like I do. Clara observed that he hadn't told her their ages or numbers, but she assumed he was afraid of overwhelming her. Once she met the kids, she could judge the family she had married into. As they round the last corner, the ranch house appeared, a robust two-story timber and stone house that blended into the surroundings. The chimney smoked, and Clara saw outbuildings across the property. She found a barn, corral, chicken coop, and other smaller structures with unknown uses. It was bigger and wealthier than she expected, and she was relieved Benjamin had been honest. But what she saw on the big front porch made her breath catch in her throat and her heart race with dread. Children weren't the only ones waiting for their new stepmother. 7 children, ranging from a teenager to a toddler barely old enough to walk, lined up like stair steps and stared at the coming wagon with curious, tired, and possibly hopeful expressions. 7 kids. Benjamin had never mentioned 7 children in his letters or the extent of the burden he was asking her to take on. Clara held the wagon seat until her knuckles turned white, her thoughts racing as she struggled to digest this discovery and decide how to respond. Benjamin must have detected her horror because he stopped the wagon far from the home and turned to her, looking guilty and imploring. He said, Clara, with a hard voice, I need to explain about the children. Clara glanced at Benjamin, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it over the horses nickering and the wind whispering over the long grass. 7 youngsters stood on that doorstep as walking proof of secrets and lies, their looks from cautious hope to outright mistrust as they faced the wagon. The lads were distributed like bookends of various heights and ages, and the youngest, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3, clutched to the skirts of an older girl in her early teens. Clara uttered 7, delivering it like a stone into still water. Benjamin, you have 7 kids. Benjamin's face was creased with guilt and hope. He grabbed for her hand, but Clara backed away, her thoughts spinning as she struggled to reconcile the man who had written her such honest, emotional letters with the one who had hid such a significant truth. In their months of correspondence, he had consistently highlighted children's need for a mother. However, he never indicated the scale of his request. I can explain, Benjamin murmured, struggling to keep his voice calm. Clara, let me explain why my letters didn't cover everything. I wasn't trying to trick you. I swear on my wife's grave. Because I was scared. Afraid? Clara's voice was sharper than she wanted, and she watched several of the porch kids step closer together, as if her tone had verified their expectations about adult conversations and disappointment. Worried about what? That I could have desired to know the entire scope of my agreement? That I deserved the truth before marrying a stranger 1,000 miles away? Benjamin winced at her comments but kept looking at her. Worried you'd never come if you knew the truth? Fearful that no sane lady would take on 7 other children, especially ones who've undergone what mine have. worried I'd spend my life alone, seeing my children grow up without the mother they need. Clara looked at the youngsters again, observing them instead than just responding to their unusual number. The oldest boy, maybe 15, stood with his shoulders squared and jaw set, displaying premature responsibility and too much adult burden knowledge. He was next to a 13-year-old girl with nicely braided dark hair and a well-mended clothing. Despite obvious wear, the other children stepped down in age order, clean and well-dressed. Clara felt their quiet more than their number. These kids did not run, play, or make noise like her Millbrook classmates. These were children who had learnt to remain quiet, wait, and watch adults with the care of those who had been disappointed before and expected it again. Their expressions showed a wariness no child should have, and Clara felt something shift in her breast as she gazed at them. "Tell me about their mother," Clara whispered, watching the kids. "Tell me what happened to Margaret." Benjamin remained silent until Clara turned to look at him. His face was pale and his hands were grasping the reins so firmly that his knuckles were white against his sunburned skin. He whispered when he talked. "Margaret wasn't their mother," he said. "No, not all. She raised the youngest three, but others." He drifted off, raking his hand through his hair to express old sadness and convoluted history. "Others approached us at different times and in different ways. Margaret and I couldn't turn away needy, homeless children." Clara's fury was becoming more complex. Caught between uncertainty and understanding, her stomach tightened. "They came to you? Benjamin, please tell me everything before I meet those kids. Someone is observing us and can tell something's wrong." Benjamin nodded and breathed deeply, preparing for a revelation he dreaded. Oldest boy Samuel. At 8, his parents died in a wagon accident 70 miles north. He's now 15. From here, he was homeless and had no family. The sheriff planned to send him to an Eastern orphanage, but Margaret begged we take him in. He stopped, looking at Samuel's protective stance and alert eyes on the porch. "Next, Ruth. Her age is 13. After giving birth to her brother, her mother died, and her father couldn't cope. He brought Ruth, 10, and the baby, a few months old, to us and said he was going to California to find gold and would send for them when he got there. He hasn't spoken since 3 years ago." When Clara realized how much Benjamin and his late wife had done, her throat clenched. These weren't merely children living without parents due to illness or accident. These were orphaned youngsters left by grown-ups who couldn't or wouldn't care for them. "Ruth's father left us her kid. Timmy is small. He's 3 and only remembers this existence. Elizabeth is 11, and her twin brothers Michael and Matthew are 9. Their father, a drifter, died in our barn one winter from illness. We found the half-starved, terrified youngsters in his wagon. Margaret healed them, so we kept them." Benjamin proceeded in a softer, more compassionate voice. "Our youngest, Mary. Maggie's daughter was born 6 months before her fever. She has no mother memories." Clara sat shocked, trying to grasp the quantity of youngsters and their experiences. These were not Benjamin's biological offspring. They were his by choice, compassion, and the reality that he and Margaret could not turn away needy children. Their generosity and responsibility were astonishing. Clara slowly explained that after Margaret died, you were left with 7 children, most of whom aren't connected. Benjamin said quietly that blood doesn't constitute a family. Love, compassion, and being there for them make a family. These kids have had enough abandonment and loss. Even though it's been hard to manage alone, I couldn't send them away. With fresh eyes, Clara stared at the youngsters. Now Samuel's protection made clear. He learned young that grown-ups could depart without warning. Ruth's caring for the younger ones showed that she had been thrust into motherhood before she was ready. In an unpredictable world, the twins likely found comfort in their kinship. Benjamin's persistence and affection have kept Timothy and Mary in this makeshift family their entire lives. "Why wouldn't you tell me in letters?" Clara asked, her wrath turning complicated. "Benjamin, this isn't simply about family size. Traumatized children with trust issues need more than basic care. This is about mothering youngsters who have every reason to distrust adults who make empty promises." Benjamin's shoulders sagged from lifting a big load. "Because I knew the sound. Unrelated widower with 7 children with complicated histories and unique needs. What woman would agree? Especially an educated, elegant woman like you, who might definitely find a marriage back east without such a complex issue." Clara insisted, "You should have let me choose. I should have been trusted to make an informed life decision." Benjamin conceded. I know your rightness. I was desperate, Clara. These kids have been through so much. I could see them losing hope. Although she's 13, Ruth has been trying to mother the younger ones. Samuel works like a man twice his age because he thinks he should keep things together. I can't console the kids like Margaret when they weep for their mama at night. Benjamin seemed exhausted to Clara. His struggle to be everything to 7 children while running a ranch and grieving. She remembered her quiet room above Murphy's store and her routine life with manageable obstacles. That existence looked so far away, like it belonged to someone else. Now what? Clara asks. What if I go back on that wagon and ask you to take me to the train station? If this is too much, what happens to those kids? In response to her words, Benjamin turned gray yet kept his eyes on her. And so I take you to the station and send you on the next train east, hoping to find the strength to keep traveling until those youngsters are old enough to care for themselves. Clara, please don't decide now based on shock and hurt. Give yourself time to meet them and observe what kind of kids they are despite their past. Try it out to see if this is your calling. Clara gazed at the youngsters again, noting how they had grown closer throughout the adult discourse, how Samuel had gone slightly ahead of the younger ones to protect them from disappointment. She observed Ruth's automatically maternal hands caressing Mary's hair, the twins flanking Elizabeth protectively, and even young Timothy seemed to comprehend something important was occurring even if he couldn't. These kids had seen enough adult failure and broken promises. They had learned to accept loss, prepare for disappointment, and avoid false hope. Clara's next few minutes would either confirm their worst concerns about adults or offer them hope that promises were followed and families could grow stronger. Clara finally said, I need to comprehend. When you wrote to me about wanting a wife and help with the kids, did you desire a housekeeper who would share your bed? Were you seeking a woman who would mother these kids, who would defend them and put them before herself? Benjamin's expression grew, and he stated with conviction that Clara hadn't already heard from him. I wanted a companion and a mother for my kids. I wanted someone to see what Margaret and I saw in these children and believe they deserve love, stability, and a bright future. I needed someone powerful to build with, what wouldn't crumble the first time things became tough. Clara felt something settle in her chest, a terrible but inevitable recognition. She remembered all the letters she had sent to Benjamin about wanting more than her quiet life in Millbrook. She envisioned adventure, purpose, and world change. Looking at those 7 youngsters on the porch, she realized this might be the purpose she had been unwittingly seeking. Clara said okay, her voice stronger than she felt. I'll stay and meet your kids, but Benjamin, if we're going to work, we can't keep secrets, half-truths, or protection from hard truths. Young children have been deceived enough. They deserve adults who are honest even when it's challenging. Benjamin's relief was so great that Clara believed he would cry. Thank you, he whispered. Clara, thanks for considering us. Promise no more secrets. I'll explain our issue in detail. Clara prepared for what could be her most crucial conversation by straightening her shoulders and smoothing her vacation dress. She remarked, Let's go meet our children, shocked by how easily she spoke our. After waiting long enough, customers deserve to know where they stand. Benjamin grinned for the first time since they arrived at the ranch, transforming his concerned countenance and reminding Clara of the gentle humor that had drawn her to his writings. Our children, he whispered. That sounds good. Clara stared at each child's face as Benjamin led the wagon to the home, attempting to guess their characteristics. Samuel's protective demeanor and solemn look showed that he had grown up too fast and taken on adult duties. Ruth's kindness to the younger children and immaculate appearance, despite her mended clothes, showed she took pride in doing her best with little resources. Michael and Matthew, twins, stood so close they could have been mirror images, their faces showing wary curiosity. Between the older and smaller children, Elizabeth looked like someone who was used to being forgotten yet still wanted attention. Timothy hopped on his toes like a 3-year-old, while Mary sucked her thumb and observed the wagon with the solemnity of a little child. As the wagon approached the porch, Clara saw more details of their life together. The children's pristine clothes revealed careful patching and letting out, indicating they had been passed down and made to last. Long treks and active days were indicated by their sturdy but worn shoes. The most striking thing was how they positioned themselves, hierarchical and protective. Samuel, Benjamin called as he stopped the cart in front of the porch. Please assist with Mrs. Parker's trunk. Clara's new married name gave her a thrill. reminding her that she was no longer Clara Whitmore making a daring decision. She was Mrs. Benjamin Parker now, and she would handle whatever came next with grace and courage. Samuel quickly helped Benjamin pull Clara's hefty trunk from the wagon bed with efficiency and care. Up close, Clara saw that despite his youth, he had calloused hands and sun-weathered skin from daily heavy work. His boots were scuffed from going around barnyards and pastures, and his clothes were clean but worn from ranch work. "Samuel, Benjamin formally requested you meet my wife, Mrs. Clara Parker." "Clara, this is Samuel, my oldest and most reliable ranch hand." Samuel stood up and stroked his hat brim in a courteous, oddly adult gesture. "Welcome to our home, ma'am," he whispered, revealing clues of his deeper voice when he grew up. Clara descended the wagon with Benjamin's help, knowing that 7 eyes were scrutinizing her every move and expression. She taught children for years, but she had never had a circumstance where first impressions mattered so much. Clara knew her next words and actions would set the tone for everything that followed, since these youngsters had been let down by too many adults. Clara smiled and looked at Samuel, thanking him. "I've heard great things about how you helped your family, really showing character for your age." Samuel's solemn visage softened briefly, suggesting her words had reached him. He nodded once, giving the impression of tentative respect. Benjamin stood by Clara, tenderly touching her back in support and partnership. "Children," he urged with the authority of a man used to being heard, "come down here and meet Mrs. Parker. I want her to know everyone because she came a long distance to join our family." The children came down from the porch in sequence, oldest to youngest, with the civility of well-trained children despite their unusual circumstances. Ruth was first, her dark hair braided, and her Sunday finest outfit on a weekday afternoon. "Yes, Mrs. Parker, I'm Ruth, and I help Papa with the house and the kids. I'm glad to meet you." Ruth's speech was formal, and she called Benjamin Papa, which Clara thought conveyed love, respect, and chosen family. "Ruth, nice to meet you. Your father told me you aid your siblings. This is a great responsibility for your age." Ruth's seriousness eased as Clara acknowledged her position in the family. "I don't mind," she said. "The kids need care, and I like it." The identical twins followed, leaving Clara wondering how anyone could tell them different. They moved like children who had never been apart, their faces showing polite fatigue. Benjamin stated, "This is Michael and Matthew," resting his hand on the left shoulder of the youngster. "Hey boys, hi Mrs. Parker." "Hello, Mrs. Parker," they said in unison, their voices so similar it was unnerving. "Welcome to our ranch." Clara said hello to Michael and Matthew, noticing their shoulders touching. "I look forward to identifying you. Do you have diverse tastes, or the same ones?" The boys glanced, a common twin communication. Michael said, "We both like horses and help with cattle." Matthew said, "Michael is better at fishing and I'm better at fixing stuff." Clara grinned at their distinctive characteristics. "Probably need help learning to fish and fix things. Ranching will be totally different from my life." Elizabeth, a girl midway between childhood and adolescence, walked forward next, her limbs promising future height. Like Ruth, she had dark hair, although it was shorter and cut by amateurs. Although her outfit was tidy, it had more patches than the others, suggesting that as the middle kid, she often received worn hand-me-downs. Her voice was softer than her siblings when she introduced herself as Elizabeth. "My age is 11. I help with hens and garden." "Hello, Elizabeth," Clara replied gently, noticing how the girl seemed to try to shrink, as if she was used to being neglected in a huge family. "I adore gardens. Show me what you're growing and teach me chicken care. Chickens have never lived in my house." Liz's eyes widened in surprise and possibly delight. "Really? You want my instruction?" Clara said yes. "My ranch life education will require skilled professors. You seem to know what I need to know." Little Timothy came last, his fat 3-year-old legs carrying him with the fearlessness of a youngster who had only experienced love and acceptance from adults. Despite being manufactured from a different fabric, his clothes were clean and well-fitted, and his boots were strong enough for a child who explored a working ranch. In a loud, confident voice, he introduced himself as Timothy, a child used to being heard in a large family. "I'm 3 and can ride a horse alone." Clara crouched to reach Timothy's eye level, impressed by his confidence and lack of nervousness. "That's impressive, Timothy. My horseback riding skills are non-existent. Do you believe you could teach me?" Timothy's face shone with the excitement of a child given the chance to be significant and useful. "Yes, I'll teach, all of you. Papa believes I'm the territory's best little rider." Clara replied sincerely. I'm sure you are. Respecting his claim, I'll need your aid learning. Clara realized as she stood up from her chat with Timothy that little Mary had been observing the entire exchange from Ruth's arms, her dark eyes absorbing every word and gesture with the intensity of a small kid. Nearly 18 months old, the youngster needed frequent attention, but was interested about the stranger in her world. Benjamin whispered, "This is Mary taking Ruth's baby. Since birth, our youngest has been the sunshine of this house." Mary looked at Clara with the solemnity of a kid learning to assess new individuals. She inherited Benjamin's black hair and her late mother's exquisite features, but her eyes showed sadness that seemed to be widespread among all the children despite their young ages. "Hello, Mary," Clara said gently, not reaching for the kid or forcing engagement. "I'm glad to meet you, sweet girl." Mary studied Clara for a while before stretching out a little hand to the stranger's face. Clara remained quiet as little fingers carefully explored her cheek and chin like a kid learning something new and vital. "Mama," Mary whispered, asking and hoping. Clara's throat tightened with surprise. This child had no memories of her original mother and no mommy role model other than Ruth and Benjamin. Clara blinked back tears before answering the simple question because it was so important. Clara replied softly, "I'll be your mama now if you like." After thinking about it, Mary leant forward in Benjamin's arms, suggesting she wished to go to Clara. Clara felt frightened and sympathetic as she held the small child, knowing she would depend on her for everything from basic care to emotional security. "Mama," Mary repeated with more surety, putting her small arms around Clara's neck with the trust only young children could offer. Clara noted the 6 other youngsters watching this exchange with eager, wary, and protective emotions. She noticed Samuel's small nod, Ruth's tentative smile, and the twins' identical cautious looks. Elizabeth's astonishment at being acknowledged and cherished, Timothy's joy in teaching and impressing a new person, and Mary's uncomplicated acceptance of free love, all evident. "Well," Clara replied, her voice trembling, "I think it's time for me to see our home and learn how to be part of our family." Benjamin smiled broadly as he pointed at the mansion. "Clara, welcome home. Welcome to lifelong." Clara found the house different than she expected after months of correspondence. The main room was large but exhibited indications of a home where 7 children played and learnt. Wooden toys were neatly piled in one area, books with old covers sat on shelves low enough for small hands, and the furniture had the gentle scars of family life. Clara was particularly impressed by how clean and ordered everything was despite the evident challenges of so many youngsters. Ruth navigated the room with the ease of a woman who had managed a household when most girls were playing with dolls. She made tea without being asked. She prepared the kettle to boil and placed mismatched cups on a worn but polished tray with precision. The other youngsters found their normal spots with the unconscious ease of habit, demonstrating routines and family control. Clara sat on Benjamin's chair with Mary, who looked content to stay in her new mother's arms, while she studied this stranger who had become so precious to her. The child's weight felt exotic and natural, reminding Clara of all the students she had soothed but adding permanent responsibility and unconditional affection. Benjamin whispered, "I know this must be overwhelming." Sitting across from Clara, 7 children is a lot to handle, especially if you expect a simpler household. Clara observed the children's arrangement, which was close enough to listen yet far enough away to let the adults talk. Samuel positioned himself near the glass to watch the grown-ups in yard. Beyond, as the family's unofficial protector, Ruth prepared tea while listening to the talk to intercede. Elizabeth sat on a low stool near the fireplace, attempting to blend in while still watching her family. The twins sat on a wooden bench with identical faces and serious concentration. "It's not only the number," Claire remarked softly, aware that the children were listening to every phrase. "It's realizing that each youngster has experienced grief and uncertainty." "You didn't mention that in your letters, Benjamin. Your article said children who required a mother's care, but you didn't say they needed healing from traumatic events." Timothy, unaware of the seriousness of the adult talk, was playing with a wooden horse and making it race over the floor, making the occasion feel both normal and heartbreaking. His innocence contrasted with his elder brother's careful weariness, reminding him that not all youngsters had suffered the same loss and exile. Benjamin raked his hands through his hair, a gesture Clara was learning to recognize as his way of handling tough emotions. "You're right, and I have no justification for not being more honest. I told myself I was shielding you from facts that may overwhelm you, but I was really protecting myself from you deciding we were too much trouble. Tell me about Margaret, Clara whispered. Tell me how she did it, how she mothered unborn children. I must grasp what you want from me and what kind of women made this family function. When Clara mentioned Margaret, the kids' attention peaked and they showed various expressions. Samuel's jaw stiffened with anguish, but Ruth's hands relaxed in tea service preparation. The twins exchanged a wordless glance, and Elizabeth seemed to retreat further as if mentioning their mother triggered feelings that were still too hard to understand. When talking about his late wife, Benjamin's voice softened with grief. Margaret's hidden talents were remarkable. She wasn't tall, gorgeous, or educated, but her love felt unlimited. When Samuel's parents died and the sheriff brought him to us, I was ready to take him to town and find him a good home. Margaret said that fearful, angry 8-year-old belonged with us after seeing him. Samuel blushed at being the center of attention but didn't leave. Clara saw that Benjamin wanted to talk about those early days when tragedy had shattered his life, despite his reluctance. Benjamin spoke gently about the youngster, listening carefully, saying Samuel didn't make it easy at first. He believed everyone he loved would die or abandon him, so he avoided anyone who could damage him. He didn't talk to us, wouldn't let us aid him, and spent much of his time in the barn fleeing from affection. Clara tried to image Samuel as a scared youngster who had lost everything familiar and safe. From terrified 8-year-old to protective, responsible 15-year-old sitting at the window showed patient affection and continuous care over many years. What changed? How? Clara asked, wondering. Margaret reached a child who had rejected new relationships. Benjamin said Margaret never forced him to accept comfort or affection. She just made sure he knew that his seat at our table was permanent, that his bed would be there every night whether he used it or not, and that we would feed, clothe, and include him in our family regardless of his wishes. She knew trust had to be established slowly, with modest gestures. Ruth finished preparing the tea and served it according to everyone's tastes. That showed extensive expertise handling huge families. She served Clara a cup of the fragrant brew and milk and honey, while acting much older than 13. Benjamin stated that Samuel eventually believed we meant what we said about him belonging here after almost a year. Margaret Moss sobbed tears of delight for an hour after he went to bed the first time he called, instead of Mrs. Parker. At this remembrance, Clara watched Samuel's face soften, revealing the sensitive boy he had once been beneath his solemn facade. This temporary family had deep, true love based on shared experiences and dedication, not blood. Benjamin explained that each child had unique issues. Ruth and her infant brother arrived in winter unwell and emaciated because their father had been raising them alone after their mother died. Margaret spent weeks treating them, sitting up all night when Timothy had fever, and teaching Ruth to read and write because her father never sent her to school. Ruth watched the tea service without comment as her cheeks flushed with shame or pride at being the topic of the conversation. Clara saw that Ruth had learned despite her childhood. Margaret learned hospitality and caring, becoming a person who anticipated needs and comforted without being asked. Benjamin said the twins and Elizabeth came to us together, his voice getting heavier as he described traumatic recollections. Their father got unwell while traveling through our neighborhood. He made it to our barn before collapsing, nearly unconscious but fighting to protect his children. He died 2 days later, but insisted Margaret take care of them. Clara looked at Elizabeth and noticed how she had wrapped her arms around herself to comfort herself while listening to how she joined this family. The twins sat motionless, their identical faces showing well-controlled anguish that suggested they recalled more about their father's death than children their age should need to carry. Elizabeth was 8, like Samuel, when he came to us, but her anguish was different. She didn't get mad or push us away. She appeared to escape inside herself, wanting to be so small and silent that the agony couldn't reach her. Margaret spent months teaching her to work in the garden and with the hens to show her she was important to our household. Clara could tell Elizabeth was still withdrawn and attempting to blend in at home. Her reaction to being congratulated for her garden and chicken labor showed how unprepared she was. She wanted recognition for her contributions. Frankly, Clara thought Margaret was extraordinary. I understand why these youngsters loved her and why losing her has been so hard for you. Mary fell asleep in Clara's arms. Her small body relaxed in the trust only young children could offer. The weight of the sleeping kid was lovely and terrible, a reminder of Clara's full dependence if she stayed and joined this difficult family. Benjamin's mood worsened as he spoke about his late wife. Margaret was extraordinary and human. I didn't realize how much caring for so many children, especially traumatized ones, affected her until it was too late. Clara was uneasy by Benjamin's statements and the older kid's tenseness at this change in the discourse. "You mean what?" Benjamin softly stated that Margaret began having dark spells a year before her death. Days when she couldn't get out of bed, and everything we'd taken on seemed too heavy. She looked at the kids and wondered if we were doing right by them or complicating their lives. Ruth had frozen her hands while washing the tea tray, and Clara could see tears in her eyes as Benjamin spoke about Margaret's troubles. Samuel's face was still, and the twins held hands so tightly that their knuckles were white. I tried to help her with domestic chores and childcare while managing the ranch and making enough money to sustain 9 people. Margaret felt like she was failing them, myself, and everyone who relied on her. She was drowning in guilt and tiredness, and I didn't know how to help. Clara realized how much Benjamin was demanding of her. This wasn't simply about stepmothering 7 kids or maintaining a big house. Being responsible for the emotional well-being of children who had lost too much, offering stability and affection while navigating the inevitable obstacles of such a complex family setting. "Did that kill her?" Clara inquired gently. "Stress and exhaustion?" Benjamin shook his head, his face deeper in pain. "She wasn't killed by that. She died attempting to convince herself she could do everything alone." The room was quiet save for Mary's breathing and the mantelpiece clock ticking. Clara could tell the older children were preparing for Benjamin's revelations by their stress. About a week had passed since we were snowed in winter. One cow got separated from the herd and became stuck in a gully a mile from the house. I was about to ride out and rescue it, but Margaret insisted on coming. She wanted to show herself she could handle ranch situations. Benjamin was straining to relate this narrative, and Clara could see that the rescue attempt had left scars that hadn't healed. The snow was deeper than expected and slippery. Margaret was thrown into the rocks when her horse fell into the ravine. By the time I got her home, she was bleeding inside after hitting her head and breaking multiple ribs. Clara's stomach clenched with sympathy and fear. She imagined how terrible it would have been for Benjamin to know his wife was gravely hurt, and he couldn't seek medical help due to snow-blocked highways. I tried everything I could to help her, but we were cut off from town and the doctor. My children helped me soothe her, but we knew Mom was dying. She lived 3 days, long enough to make me pledge to keep the family together and not allow her death abandon children who had already lost so much. Benjamin's statements were followed by a terrible quiet. Clara saw how this narrative affected the youngsters and understood why they all handled themselves with such careful control and watched grown-ups with the tiredness of those who have learnt that their loved ones could vanish unexpectedly. Clara slowly explained that you weren't only looking for domestic help or friendship when you wrote to me about wanting a wife and mother for your children. You wanted someone to replace Margaret and take on the massive burden that ultimately overwhelmed her. Benjamin stared her down, no longer trying to hide his request. "Yes, I needed someone strong enough to love these children as they deserve and help me maintain my promise to Margaret about keeping our family together. I realize it's hard, maybe more than any rational person could handle." Clara noticed that the 7 children were watching her with equal parts hope and terror. They had previously lost one mother figure and dealt with the uncertainty and anguish of such a major family shift. Whatever she did in the next few minutes would either give children hope for stability and affection or confirm their darkest concerns about adult promises. Clara answered carefully, "You want me to love and care for 7 youngsters who have every reason to distrust new people. You want me to comfort and guide traumatized children. You want me to help you maintain a non-blood family based on choice and commitment." Benjamin just said, "That's my request." Mary's weight in her arms kept Clara asleep despite the loud conversation. Since Margaret was her only mother, this youngster had no memory of the lady who had saved her life, but every yearning for the woman who would make her feel loved and protected. "What happens if I fail?" Clara inquired quietly. "What if I can't manage the duty or feel overwhelmed like Margaret? If another mother disappears, what becomes to these kids?" Clara could see Benjamin was dreading the question, but knew he had to answer honestly. She knew that her query had tapped on the children's deepest concern about hope for a new beginning as their focus increased. Eventually, Benjamin said, "We'll confront that issue, but Clara, I've read your letters for months. I've seen how you write about your students and care about strangers' kids. Your power, wisdom, and love are evident. I don't think you'll fail these kids or abandon them in tough times. Clara cried as she looked around at the expectant faces, 7 children who needed so much more than she had ever imagined, and a father who asked her to help him keep an impossible promise and a responsibility that seemed terrifying and right. Benjamin replied, "There's something else you need to know," making Clara's stomach knot with fear. "Something about Margaret's death has rendered our situation more dangerous than my letters suggested." The older children exchanged expressions of shared knowledge and dread, and Clara knew that Benjamin's announcement was something the whole family had been worried about. Harold Winters, Margaret's brother-in-law, has been pursuing custody of some of the children since her death. He pressures territorial authorities to remove non-blood relatives from our home, claiming we have no legal right to keep them. Clara got a chill when she saw the family's struggles. He wants what with the kids? Benjamin's face reddened in wrath and fury. Harold owns a textile mill in Pennsylvania and has always wanted cheap labor. He promises good houses and moral education for the kids. He wants workers who can't demand fair wages or treatment. Samuel's hands clenched into fists at the mention of Harold Winters, and Clara saw fear in the older children's eyes. They realized what was at stake, and that their family's existence was more vulnerable than it appeared to the younger ones. "How urgent is this threat?" Clara asks. Her mind was processing Benjamin's revelations. "Harold has corresponded with Cedar Falls Judge Morrison to argue for child removal. Harold has influence back east and is tenacious in breaking up a well-functioning family, but the judge has been reluctant. Having a bride and good mother for the kids will strengthen us." Clara now understood why Benjamin was so keen to find a marriage and willing to lie about his family status. There were more at stake than domestic bliss or personal fulfillment. They were about protecting 7 children from a guy who saw them as financial assets, rather than people deserving of love and care. Clara softly remarked, "My stay or leaving doesn't just affect our marriage chances. It determines whether these youngsters can stay in their only stable home." Benjamin was apologetic, his voice thick with remorse and regret. "I should have told you everything before you came out here. Before you got emotionally involved, I should have let you leave. But Clara, I was afraid you'd think we were too much bother, and these children would lose another mother figure before they met you if you knew the real truth." Clara gazed at Mary, resting soundly in her arms, ignorant of the adult conversation that would shape her future. This child had already lost one mother and was at risk of losing her entire family to a man who cared nothing for her. 6 other children waited in the room for Clara's reaction, their features exhibiting the reserve of those who had learnt not to hope too much. In fear of disappointment, Samuel's protectiveness had increased, as if to protect his younger siblings from another painful loss. Ruth used familiar routines to calm her concern about the future as she watched the tea service with trembling hands. The twins sat motionless in their similar stances, their link evidently comforting them in the face of family devastation. Elizabeth had shrunk even farther, wrapping her arms over her knees to shield herself from being sent away to an uncertain fate. Timothy ignored grown-up tensions and played on. Despite his surroundings, he sensed something major was happening. Responsibility weighed down Clara like a shroud. She was asked to protect 7 children, help a father maintain an impossible promise, and face a future that was nothing like the tranquil, manageable life she had pictured when she answered Benjamin's advertisement. But when she gazed around at these children's faces, Clara knew that her viewpoint had changed dramatically during this stressful day. These were no longer Benjamin's children or a burden. She was given a task. They were her children, family, and purpose for battling forward. Clara finally responded, "All right," her voice stronger than she felt. "We must discuss how to protect them." 3 days after Clara's arrival, sharp and eager hoofbeats on the packed earth outside the house rang out in the early morning air, still cold from mountain nights. Benjamin stiffened at the kitchen table, reading ranch accounts while Clara helped Ruth make breakfast, unconsciously reaching for the gun above the doorway. The children, who had been talking peacefully about their morning tasks, went silent with the tiredness of those who had learned that unexpected guests rarely brought good news. Clara put down the wooden spoon she was using to stir the porridge and immediately approached tiny Mary, who was playing with her rag doll near the window in the sunlight. After 3 days of learning names, preferences, rituals, and the innumerable minute nuances of everyday living with 7 children, Clara began to sense the first tentative strands of connection. Samuel stood in the kitchen doorway with her and her new family, his face gloomy with mature concern that looked strange on someone so young. "Papa, 3 men ride to the house. One is wearing a city suit and has official-looking paperwork." Benjamin stood up from the table with a tense jaw, his motions careful and controlled despite Clara's attention on his shoulders. "Harold," he whispered, frustrated and angry. I should have known he wouldn't wait long after hearing Clara was arriving. Clara clenched her gut as she realized Benjamin's threat was true. Harold Winters arrived in Cedar Falls holding what appeared to be legal authority. The youngsters moved closer together with the unconscious movement of those who had learnt to find safety in togetherness, their faces indicating different levels of comprehension about what this visit would imply for their family's future. "Ruth, take the kids upstairs," Benjamin said calmly but authoritatively. "Samuel, please stay close and don't speak unless I ask." He looked at his wife of 3 days, Clara, apologizing and hoping. "I'm sad you have to face this so soon, but we must unite to keep our family intact." Clara used strength she didn't know she had to straighten her shoulders and tidy her skirts. "Need me to do what?" "Just be yourself," Benjamin replied, his voice softening with real fondness despite the circumstances. "Be the woman who travels 1,000 kilometers to mother needy children. Be the mother who fought for 7 fearful children." The main door was knocked with the keen authority of men used to fast responses. Benjamin moved slowly to the door with Clara close behind him, while Samuel positioned himself to see and hear everything but stay out of sight. Clara saw small faces staring down from the loft, their features reflecting the anxiety and uncertainty that had become too common in their young lives. The smaller children had reluctantly accepted Benjamin's order to go upstairs. Benjamin opened the door to see 3 men on the front porch who looked like they had all the legal authority in any situation. The center man was Harold Winters, wearing an expensive black suit that looked out of place on a Wyoming ranch, and exuding the arrogance of someone who had never been told no by anybody important. His well-fed, soft middle suggested pleasant city living and desk employment rather than heavy labor. He was about 40. Harold was flanked by 2 other men with various roles in this unwelcome delegation. Was tall and skinny, with the pale complexion of a lawyer who spent his days indoors poring over legal paperwork and looking for loopholes to exploit for his client. The other appeared to be a territory official, wearing a badge that caught the early sun and standing rigidly like a serious official. Harold said Benjamin in a flat, unpolite manner sounding like a businessman. "You have a wife. How fortuitous, given your unorthodox living arrangements, legal issues." "Harold," Benjamin replied calmly, despite the effort it took to stay cordial. "I'm not surprised to see you here, but I had hoped you'd have thought about what's best for the kids since we last spoke." Clara watched Harold Winters' eyes as he surveyed the ranch like a property appraiser rather than a family home. She felt a chill when he looked at her dismissively, and seemed to reject her as irrelevant to the vital business he had come to do. Benjamin formally introduced Clara as his wife, placing his hand on her back to show support and partnership. "Clara, Harold Winters and his colleagues are Margaret's brother-in-law. Mrs. Parker," Harold remarked with a little nod that showed no respect for her status in the family, "I trust you appreciate that your recent marriage doesn't change the fundamental legal difficulties surrounding the children in this household." Clara became angry at Harold's dismissive tone and his allusion to the children as objects to be distributed according to legal precedent rather than people with feelings and familial relationships. "I recognize that these children are my family now," she added, holding Harold's gaze, "and they deserve to stay in the home where they discovered love and stability." The lawyer appeared self-important, believing legal expertise outweighed human concerns in all essential matters. "No, Mrs. Parker. The law doesn't acknowledge emotional relationships in non-biological parent-child custody cases. Mr. and Mrs. Parker cannot legally retain custody of non-blood-related children, regardless of how they came into their household." Samuel entered the doorway behind Benjamin and Clara, his determined visage making him look older than 15. "What about our desires?" he requested with respect for adults and strong belief about his rights. "Don't we choose where we live and who cares for us?" Harold's countenance grew agitated at Samuel's interference, and Clara could tell he saw the children's preferences as unimportant obstacles to overcome rather than valid future considerations. He dismissively argued children can't make their own welfare decisions. "That's why the law gives such judgments to responsible people who can evaluate events objectively." "Adults like you?" Clara asked, her voice harsh enough to show she wouldn't be frightened by legal posturing or claims of superior judgment. Adults who consider kids as workers rather than people who need love and care. Odes, the territorial official, watched the conversation carefully to evaluate the accusations and reasons. He stated, "Mr. Winters, you've made serious allegations about these children's welfare and living situation. I must investigate before making custody judgments." This unexpected assertion of government procedure over his expectations of automatic legal success shook Harold's faith. "Marshal Davidson, I've shown you a lot about this household's irregularity and most of these children's lack of legal guardianship." Marshal Davidson said that documentation is one thing, sounding more fair and concerned than Clara expected from a territorial authority. Seeing the living circumstances and talking to the kids is different. "I won't support removing children from their homes without a good reason." The marshal's statements gave Clara hope that he might prioritize the children's welfare over legal issues. "Marshal Davidson, would you like to visit our home and meet the kids? Look for healthy, well-educated, and cheerful people here." "That's what I'll do," the marshal said, ignoring Harold's obvious unhappiness. "Yes, Mr. Winters, but I won't make any conclusions concerning these children's future until I investigate their current situation." Benjamin retreated to let the marshal into the house, while Harold and his lawyer grimaced at not being able to get the kids and leave. Clara could tell that Harold had imagined this to be an easy matter of imposing legal authority over a family that had no means to oppose, and that defending his stance to a territory official was not his first option. As Marshal Davidson began his inspection, the house seemed to hold its breath as his trained eyes examined the clean, well-maintained interior, the children's well-organized and cared-for belongings, and the general atmosphere of a home where people lived together with respect and affection. Ruth brought the smaller children downstairs at Benjamin's signal, and they positioned themselves in the main room with the dignity of those being judged and wanting to make a good impression. Marshal Davidson gently said, "Children," unlike Harold's disdainful tone, "each of you should tell me about your life here and how you feel about it. Since this isn't an exam, you can tell me anything you're worried about without consequences." Clara observed how each youngster responded to the marshal's courteous approach, from first fatigue to cautious cooperation when they understood he was interested in their viewpoints rather than just legal proceedings. Samuel spoke first, using his seriousness to relate his years with Benjamin and Margaret, his ranch management, and his great commitment to keep his family together. Samuel quietly stated that "This is my only home. After my parents died, Mr. and Mrs. Parker didn't merely take me in, they accepted me into their family. They taught me to work hard, read and write, and take care of others. I'm old enough to survive on my own, but these younger children need protection and care, and they'll get it best here." Ruth then spoke, mature and competent. She was far from Harold's legal arguments' hapless victim in household management. "Since arriving, Mrs. Clara has proved she cares about our needs and wants. She listens to us speak. She respects us as individuals and asks our input on daily issues. Adults have made enough decisions concerning us without considering us. Papa Benjamin and Mrs. Clara disagree." When their moment came, the twins talked in their unique synchronized manner, conveying both their joint perspective and individual personalities. Michael whispered, "Our actual father wanted us to be safe and happy. With this family, we've been both." Matthew said, "No one made us feel like burdens or charity cases. Papa Benjamin, Ma Margaret, and now Mrs. Clara treat us like family, not just mouths to feed." Even the marshal was pleased by Elizabeth's awareness of her circumstances when urged to speak. "I know some people think it's wrong for children to live with non-relative adults," she remarked softly. "But family goes beyond blood. It's about folks who take care of you when you're sick, educate you right from wrong, and provide food, clothing, and a warm bed. It's about individuals that love you despite your mistakes and believe you can be nice and valuable." Timothy, too young to understand the marshal's visit's legal ramifications, crawled onto Clara's lap and confidently declared, "This is my mother, and this is my papa, and this is my house, and I don't want to move anyplace else." Mary, hardly old enough to speak, clung to Clara whenever someone suggested she should go somewhere else. Her small voice repeated, my mama," with the desperation of a child who had lost one mother and wouldn't lose another. Marshal Davidson spent most of the morning monitoring the family's interactions and asking about the children's education, daily routines, health, and future success. Clara could tell he was impressed by what he observed, that careful parenting and strong family relationships were unmistakable. Harold became increasingly angry as his beliefs about simple legal victory were disproven. "Marshall, why are we wasting time on passion and emotion when the law is clear? These children need legal guardians and decent homes, not romantic notions of frontier families forming their own laws." Marshall Davidson strongly advised Mr. Winters that the law protects children, not adult legal complexities. "I picture a well-functioning family, healthy, happy, and well-cared-for children, and adults who are committed to stability and love. I'll need strong evidence of damage or neglect before upsetting these children's lives." Clara felt Benjamin grasp her hand as they recognized Harold's arrogant notions about legal authority were shattering under examination and official fairness. The children seemed to realize that the tide was turning in their favor, their countenance exhibiting the first real hope since the rude guests came. Harold's lawyer boldly asserted his legal advantage. "Marshall Davidson, my client has established acceptable homes for all of these youngsters in Pennsylvania, where they'll receive proper education, moral instruction, and trade training to become productive citizens. Surely such benefits exceed any emotional bonds created in this odd household. What valuable trades might these kids learn?" Clara pointedly questioned, aware of her teaching experience. Her to the lawyer's artfully imprecise description of Harold's true intentions. Being asked about his plans directly made Harold's face flush. "My textile mill would teach the kids manufacturing and industrial production. Workers would receive salaries, accommodation, and board, and a disciplined atmosphere that fosters character and work ethic." "What age may kids start this job?" Marshall Davidson inquired, his tone intensifying as he gained insight into Harold's suggestion. The lawyer replied that 8-year-olds can work in textile manufacture, evidently unaware that his answer was damaging his client's case. "Early exposure to constructive work eliminates lazy habits and teaches youngsters to sustain themselves." Clara was furious at Harold's representative's nonchalant discussion of putting youngsters to work in industrial conditions, using legal terminology to hide vulnerable minors' exploitation. She simply stated that you meant child labor. You want to take these children from loving homes and put them in factories. Provide structure and purpose for children who might otherwise burden society. Harold broke down as his true objectives became apparent. These kids need discipline and work, not cuddling and feeling. Samuel was listening to this argument with mounting irritation, and Clara could tell he was straining to contain his temper in the face of Harold's contemptuous attitude regarding his family's well-being. "Mr. Winters," he politely said, barely suppressed his rage. "Since age 8, I've worked on this ranch, gaining skills that will help me survive any place in the territory. I can fix equipment, manage accounts, and handle cattle. These skills are useful too. I learned them in a place that valued me as a person, not just a worker." Harold dismissed ranch employment as unsuitable for modern industrial civilization. "These kids require a disciplined environment to succeed in metropolitan jobs." Marshall Davidson heard enough. "Mr. Winters, my inquiry today found no evidence that these youngsters are being harmed or neglected. They appear healthy, educated, and committed to their family. Your idea to employ 8-year-olds in industrial labor raises concerns about exploitation, not welfare." Harold became furious when he discovered his legal tactic was failing. "Marshall, these folks can't legally keep unrelated children. The law doesn't allow permanent guardianship based on emotional bonds." Marshall Davidson stated that the law does not require me to take children from suitable families for technicalities. "Mr. and Mrs. Parker have shown they can care for these children, and the youngsters have indicated definite lifestyle preferences. This family should not be disrupted without proof of injury or legal precedent." Clara's relief made her knees weak, but she saw Harold wasn't ready. Be defeated gracefully. His face was flushed with annoyance and rage, and she could tell he was looking for another legal angle to win over a family that had defied him. Harold said firmly, promising more legal challenges and harassment. "Alternative territorial officials may see this differently, and alternative legal remedies may work better to care for these youngsters." Benjamin remarked calmly. "Mr. Winters, his warning was stronger for its calmness. If you continue to harass my family or use legal manipulation to separate children from their only stable home, I'll make sure every territorial official and federal judge in Wyoming knows who you are and your true intentions." Harold tried to speak angrily, but Marshall Davidson cut him off like someone who had had enough of legal posturing and thinly veiled threats. "Mr. Winters, Return to Pennsylvania and focus on your genuine business pursuits. These kids belong with loving, caring folks. Any additional disruption of this family will be considered harassment and punished. The three unpleasant guests left with obvious reluctance and murmured threats about appeals and higher authorities, but Clara could tell Harold's confidence had been rocked by his failure to win easily. The children, who had kept their cool throughout the ordeal, eventually showed their relief when hoofbeats faded. "Is it over?" Ruth asked gently, with the cautious hope of someone who had learned not to celebrate too soon when grown-ups promised protection and stability. Benjamin replied honestly and gathered his children around him, protective of his family after fighting hard to keep it together. Harold may try other legal methods, but territorial authorities will value Marshall Davidson's findings. "We've gained time and legal precedent for family unity." Clara glanced around at the 7 children who had become her responsibility and greatest joy, and felt a sense of strong protection that astonished her. She wanted to ensure that these children never again had to worry being separated from loved ones after multiple lives of uncertainty and grief. Clara remarked strongly that we must prepare for whatever happens next. We must record the children's welfare, education, health, and happiness. We need relationships with other families and community leaders to verify our integrity and home stability. We must become such a successful family that no legal challenge can succeed. Samuel nodded with his usual seriousness when facing family issues. "We can. We've taken care of each other for years, and Mrs. Clara will improve things." Clara cried as she understood that these youngsters had stopped seeing her as their father's new wife and started seeing her as their mother and guardian during this dreadful morning. Their duty was huge, but she was beginning to love each of these extraordinary young people who had trusted her with their destinies. "Yes," she whispered, drawing Mary closer and touching Timothy's hair and Elizabeth's shoulder. "We'll look out for one another and never split up again." After Harold Winters left the Parker Ranch in defeat 2 years earlier, Clara still looked toward the horizon when she heard unexpected hoofbeats approaching the house. The threat had subsided as evidence showed the Parker family was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. But Clara's protective instincts from that morning had never totally subsided. Clara managed the pandemonium of getting 7 youngsters ready for their obligations on the most important day in their family's recent history as the early sun spilled through the kitchen windows. Today marked the end of adoption proceedings that certified Benjamin and Clara as the guardians of all 7 children. After months of paperwork, testimonials, and legal procedures to secure their safety, Samuel, now 17 and tall enough to look Benjamin in the eye, adjusted his nicest shirt collar to calm his smaller siblings. The frightened 8-year-old who arrived at the ranch had grown into a wonderful young man who could manage intricate agricultural operations while teaching Timothy to read and teach. "Elizabeth, horse care details. Stop fidgeting," Samuel instructed the twins, who were using kitchen basin water to tame their frizzy hair. "No one at the courthouse will notice your great appearance." Ruth, 15, and looking more like her mother, had dressed the younger children for the ceremony that would finalize their legal status as Parker family members. Clara frequently admired the young woman's ability to manage her own adolescent desires with her job as helper and surrogate mother to her younger brothers. Her maternal instincts had only become stronger with age. "Mary, hold still so I can braid your hair properly," Ruth patiently urged, sliding her fingers through the tiny girl's dark curls like she'd done it for years. "Today is special because the judge will declare us a family. Therefore, we want to look our best." Mary, nearly 4 and babbling like a kid who had always had attentive listeners, cheerfully cooperated with Ruth's ministrations as she did with most activities. She had no memories of life before the Parker family, so today's ceremony was just another family adventure, not the end of a judicial battle for her safety and future. Elizabeth had grown from a shy, almost inconspicuous youngster into a confident 11-year-old who spoke out for herself and others more often, surprising Clara. After Benjamin constructed her a tiny greenhouse, she experimented with novel vegetable and flower species that could survive Wyoming's harsh climate. Elizabeth approached Mrs. Clara with a tiny bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered that morning. "I thought you would like to carry them today. They came from the garden plot where you taught me to grow new roses last spring." Clara smiled as she accepted the flowers, grateful for the thoughtfulness and proud of Elizabeth's growing confidence. "They're lovely, honey. Thank you for thinking of something special today." Despite their similar appearance, Michael and Matthew developed distinct personalities. with Michael being good at mechanics and Matthew with animal work. Clara credited the boys' growing comfort with voicing their own thoughts to growing up in a family that appreciated each child's unique contributions, rather than expecting them to conform to adult standards. Timothy, now 5 and full of energy, hopped from adult to adult seeking reassurance regarding the day's events and confirmation that he would never leave his family. His recollections of life before the Parker Ranch were almost non-existent, but he had learned from his elder brothers that some youngsters didn't have people who would battle to keep them secure and loved. Timothy pulled on Papa Benjamin's sleeve as he reviewed the courthouse ceremony's legal documentation. "After today, nobody can make us leave, right? We're your children forever. Always Mrs. Clara's kids?" Benjamin placed down his papers and knelt at Timothy's eye level, gravely addressing the boy's concerns. "That's right, son. After today, the law will recognize what we've always known in our hearts, that you and your siblings are family forever. We can never be apart again." Clara, observed this discussion with the joy of someone, has discovered her life's purpose in protecting and nurturing youngsters with uncertain futures. 3 years ago, a woman answered Benjamin's advertisement looking for something more meaningful than her tranquil existence in Pennsylvania. She never anticipated that becoming the ferocious guardian of 7 remarkable children would be so fulfilling. The wagon ride to Cedar Falls was joyous as the family headed to the courthouse for the final legal processes. The children joyfully discussed their future goals, current projects, and ambitions for life on the ranch, which had become their sanctuary and launchpad for maturity. Samuel was accepted to study agriculture and ranch management at the Territorial College, allowing him to return to the family property with enhanced knowledge that could benefit them for decades. Ruth was in touch with a teacher training program to follow Clara's lead in frontier schools, while adjusting to Western education's particular obstacles. The twins were exhibiting practical skills that would make them useful community members, while Elizabeth's gift for growing things was already attracting neighbors who sought her assistance on their gardens and agricultural issues. Timothy and Mary were too young to know their futures, but Clara knew that children raised with such love and encouragement would find fulfilling adulthoods. After Harold Winter's lost court challenge, Territorial official Judge Harrison welcomed the Parker family with the warmth of someone who had been following their story with personal interest and professional respect. A brief but meaningful courtroom ceremony recognized the links formed through choice, dedication, and unconditional love, rather than biological relationships. As he signed the final forms, Judge Harrison added, "It brings me great pleasure to officially recognize your legal guardianship of Samuel, Ruth, Michael, Matthew, Elizabeth, Timothy, and Mary Parker. These youngsters are lucky to have grown-ups who understand that love and dedication build families, not circumstance." The ranch party celebrated a family who had overcome legal obstacles, social prejudices, and personal suffering to become stronger and more together. Neighborhood friends and neighbors brought food, music, and the love that had gotten the Parker family through their most difficult times to celebrate their victory. As twilight fell over the ranch and the last visitors left, Clara and Benjamin stood on the front porch, watching their 7 children play in the yard with the unfettered abandon of young people who knew they were safe with their family. The scene before them symbolized all they had struggled for years to maintain and nurture. "Do you regret answering that ad?" Benjamin asked calmly, wrapping his arms over Clara's shoulders like a trusted partnership that had survived fire. Clara examined the topic, recalling the lady she was when she first read Benjamin's letter demanding a wife and mother for his children. Clara wanted adventure and purpose, but she envisioned something more traditional than what she found in Wyoming. Clara answered no, snuggling into Benjamin's warmth as she watched Samuel teach Timothy how to handle a rope, Ruth braid wildflowers into Mary's hair while reading her a story, and the twins work on a project that required much discussion and gesturing. "I thought I was looking for a different life, but I found my true life." Elizabeth came to the porch with a lantern she had lit to help the smaller children see their evening activities, her face sparkling with confidence that had replaced her earlier exhaustion. "Mrs. Clara, Mary wants you to tell us how you came to Wyoming and became our mother." Clara chuckled again, acknowledging the request as a long-standing family practice. The children never got weary of hearing how their unorthodox family came together and how their parents picked each other and fought for them when legal and social challenges threatened their unity. "It's our favorite story," Elizabeth stated simply, And Clara could see it in the eager expressions of the other children who had gathered around the porch steps to hear an old but beloved tale. Clara sat Mary on her lap in the rocking chair Benjamin had built for her during her first winter at the ranch, while the other children formed a semicircle to see her face in the lantern light. This practice had become one of their most treasured family traditions, strengthening their relationships and celebrating their decisions. Clara started with the typical opening that the kids expected and always got their attention. A Pennsylvania school teacher thought she knew her future. She thought educating other people's kids and spending her evenings alone in a little room above a general shop would be enough to make her happy. The children settled in for the familiar but eternally fascinating story of how their family had started, how their mother had traveled across a continent to answer their father's letter, how she had found 7 children who needed protection and love, and how she had chosen to fight the most important battle of her life to keep them together. Clara spoke about how taking risks for love and family could change life unexpectedly. 3 years earlier, the mail-order bride had stepped off the train in Cedar Falls, looking for a calm domestic life with a man she had never met and 1 or 2 children to call her mother. Instead, she faced a complex legal and emotional predicament that required all her fortitude, determination, and maternal instinct. She was the protector of 7 children who had already suffered too much loss and uncertainty, the partner of a man who would fight any battle to keep his chosen family together, and the fierce guardian of a home that represented safety and love for everyone who lived there. They all lived happily ever after? Despite knowing the ending and knowing that this wasn't the end of the narrative but only the beginning of the Parker family's future adventures, Timothy inquired. Clara gently corrected, adopting her usual family narrative conclusion. They lived purposefully ever after. They lived with love, strength, and commitment to support one another through hardships. Indeed, my dears, that is better than happily ever after. The children went to bed, but Clara stayed on the porch with Benjamin to watch the stars arise in the vast Wyoming sky and think on their adventure. Safe moment. Tomorrow would bring new difficulties and opportunities to prove their family's strength and endurance, but today was for appreciation and quiet celebration of everything they had built. Mary was standing in her nightgown with her rag doll, her steady companion from infancy, when Mrs. Clara heard a small voice from the doorway. "Dear, what is it?" Clara opened her arms to the tiny girl, who needed extra nightly reassurance despite having a huge and loving family. Mary simply answered, "I love you, Mama," expressing the trust and affection that had made Clara's shift from lonely school teacher to strong mother protector feasible and necessary. "I love you too, my lovely girl," Clara said, holding Mary close and inhaling the wonderful aroma of childhood on her hair and skin, always and forever. Clara contemplated the letter she had written to her former Pennsylvania neighbors about her new life and the family she had found in the most unexpected circumstances as Benjamin brought the drowsy child back to her bed and she secured the house for the night. She tried to illustrate how much more difficult and gratifying her life had become since answering Benjamin's advertisement. The woman who had folded linens in a small room above Murphy's General Store seemed like a stranger from a previous life waiting for her real story to begin. She had dreamed of more than peaceful regularity and predictable days, but she could never have imagined the exquisite complexity of loving and defending 7 children who needed her fiery devotion more than safety or respectability. Clara Parker, guardian of the impossible family, 7 hearts that had learnt to trust again, and companion to a man who knew love was always worth fighting for, smiled as she checked the locks and turned down the lighting. Tonight was wonderful in its fullness and quiet in the house that had become her fortress and sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring whatever trials families like theirs usually faced. Wildflower-scented Wyoming wind promised another season of growth and possibilities. 7 children slept knowing they belonged, were treasured and protected, and that their parents would do anything to keep them safe and loved. Clara discovered her purpose in the most unexpected places and produced something that would outlast her. The children she and Benjamin had nurtured with such passionate dedication would carry the principles of chosen family and unconditional love into adulthood, creating ripple effects of compassion and courage that would affect countless lives in ways they may never comprehend. Clara reflected as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom with Benjamin that it was worth every second of uncertainty, legal battle, and sacrifice to build it. She answered a stranger's letter seeking adventure and found the greatest adventure of all, the chance to alter the world one child, one passionate protective deed, one unconditional love. The mail-order bride became something she never imagined, more important than she ever imagined. She was the mother who protected her children from harm, the woman who proved that families are made by choice and nourished by love, and the guardian of 7 bright futures. You'll see 2 more noteworthy articles next. You won't if this one works. Want to skip these? Check them out by clicking